I never thought a simple doorbell would almost cost my daughter her life. When my 14-year-old autistic daughter Emma knocked on our HOA president's door to retrieve a lost ball, she was met with a .22 caliber bullet to the head instead of basic human decency. The woman claimed she was defending her property from an intruder. But what happened next in court would expose a conspiracy so twisted it would shake our entire community to its core. This is the true story of how one mother's quest for justice uncovered the dark truth about power, prejudice, and the lengths some people will go to protect their secrets. My name is Sarah Martinez. And until 3 years ago, I believed in the goodness of people. I thought communities were built on compassion, especially when it came to protecting our children. I was wrong. Emma, my 14-year-old daughter, has high-functioning autism. She's brilliant, curious, and sees the world through a lens of pure honesty that most adults have forgotten. We moved to Meadowbrook Estates in 2021, drawn by the promise of a family-friendly community with pristine landscaping and strong property values. What I didn't realize was that beneath the perfect facade lurked something much darker. The trouble started almost immediately with Patricia Kellerman, our HOA president, at 58. Patricia ruled our neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She had steel gray hair, always pulled into a severe bun, cold blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a smile that never quite reached those eyes. From day one, she made it clear that Emma's presence was unwelcome. Your daughter needs to understand boundaries, Patricia told me during our first HOA meeting. This isn't a playground. We maintain certain standards here. Emma's crime: she had been walking our golden retriever, Max, without a leash in our own front yard, technically against HOA rules, but hardly worth the venom in Patricia's voice. The harassment escalated over months. Patricia filed nice complaints when Emma bounced her basketball in our driveway. She sent cease and desist letters when Emma drew chalk art on our own walkway. She even tried to fine us when Emma's stimming behaviors, her way of self-regulating during overwhelming moments, supposedly disturbed the neighborhood aesthetic. I started documenting everything: photos, emails, recorded phone calls. My husband, David, thought I was being paranoid. But something in Patricia's eyes when she looked at Emma chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just annoyance. It was pure hatred. The breaking point came on March 15th, 2023. It was a beautiful spring afternoon, and Emma was playing with Max in our backyard. The ball accidentally went over the fence into Patricia's pristine garden. Emma, being Emma, wanted to immediately apologize and retrieve it. "Mom, I need to get our ball back," she said, her voice carrying the earnest tone I knew so well. "It's not ours to keep in Mrs. Kellerman's flowers." I was on a work call, so I waved her on, thinking it would be a simple 30-second interaction. Emma walked round to Patricia's front door, Max trotting beside her. She knocked politely and waited. What happened next is burned into my memory forever. I heard the gunshot from inside my house, one sharp crack that made my blood freeze. Then Emma's scream, not the usual overwhelmed cry I was used to, but something primal and terrified that cut through my soul like glass. I dropped everything and ran outside. Emma was lying on Patricia's pristine front steps, blood pooling beneath her head, Max barking frantically beside her. Patricia stood in her doorway, still holding a .22 caliber rifle, her face a mask of cold satisfaction. "She was trespassing," Patricia said as I cradled my daughter's head. Feeling warm blood seep through my fingers, I warned her to stay away from my property. The next minutes were a blur of 911 calls and sirens. Emma was airlifted to Children's Hospital with a bullet lodged dangerously close to her brainstem. The doctors said millimeters made the difference between life and death, while I sat in that sterile hospital waiting room, praying for my daughter's life. Patricia was released on her own reconnaissance after claiming self-defense. She told police Emma had been aggressively banging on her door and that she feared for her safety from a 90-pound autistic teenager. But here's what broke my heart the most. Patricia knew exactly who Emma was. She'd been watching us for 2 years, documenting Emma's routines, learning her patterns. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or split-second panic. This was calculated. Emma survived the surgery, but the bullet couldn't be safely removed. It remains lodged in her skull, a permanent reminder of that day, the physical therapy, the trauma counseling, the night terrors. Patricia had stolen my daughter's innocence with one squeeze of a trigger. 2 weeks after the shooting, as Emma was finally stable enough to come home, I received a certified letter that made my blood boil. It was from Patricia's attorney, demanding that we pay for the property damage Emma had allegedly caused to Patricia's garden when she fell bleeding on the flowers. That's when I knew this wasn't just about one trigger-happy woman. This was about something much bigger, much more sinister, and I was going to expose every last bit of it, no matter what it cost me. The woman who emerged from that hospital wasn't the same trusting mother who had moved to Meadowbrook Estates 2 years earlier. Seeing your child fight for her life changes you in ways that can't be undone. I became a warrior. And Patricia Kellerman had just declared war on the wrong family. My first call was to Jake Morrison, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in hate crimes. Jake was in his 40s, with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much injustice to ever look truly surprised. When I told him the story, he leaned back in his leather chair and whistled low. "Sarah, I've seen some twisted cases, but this," he shook his head, "the fact that she demanded payment for property damage after shooting your daughter, that's not just cruelty. That's calculated psychological warfare." We immediately filed a civil lawsuit for attempted murder, hate crimes, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But Jake warned me that Patricia's self-defense claim, combined with her spotless record as an upstanding HOA president, would make this an uphill battle. Juries love suburban housewives who claim they were protecting their homes. Jake explained, "We need to prove this wasn't self-defense. We need to prove it was premeditated." That's when I decided to become my own private investigator. Every night after Emma fell asleep, when she could finally sleep without the nightmares, I combed through 2 years of horror meeting minutes, emails, and community records. David thought I was obsessing unhealthily, but I knew the truth was buried somewhere in Patricia's paper trail. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Chen, our elderly neighbor who lived directly across from Patricia. She knocked on my door 3 weeks after the shooting, carrying a manila envelope with shaking hands. "I should have said something sooner," she whispered, constantly glancing over her shoulder. "But I was afraid. Patricia has too much power in this community." Inside the envelope were printed screenshots of private Facebook messages from a closed group called Meadowbrook Standards Committee. Patricia had created this secret group with 5 other HOA board members. The messages made my stomach turn. "The Martinez girl is becoming a real problem," Patricia had written. "Her behaviors are affecting property values. Potential buyers see this and think our community lacks proper screening." Board member Dennis Walsh had replied, "Can't we just fine them into moving?" But Patricia's response chilled me to the bone. "Fines aren't enough. We need a permanent solution. Some people only understand force." This was dated to weeks before the shooting. Mrs. Chen wasn't done. She had also been secretly recording horror meetings where Patricia made increasingly hostile comments about Emma. In one recording, Patricia's voice was crystal clear. "Disabled children don't belong in premium communities like this. Their parents choose to live here, knowing they can't control their children's behaviors. At some point, we have to protect the majority from the minority." But the smoking gun came when Mrs. Chen showed me security footage from her own doorbell camera. The timestamp showed Emma approaching Patricia's door at 3:47 p.m. on March 15th. Emma knocked softly, waited patiently, and was already turning to leave when Patricia opened the door with the rifle already raised. There was no aggressive banging, no threatening behavior. Emma had actually taken 2 steps backward and raised her hands in a peaceful gesture before Patricia pulled the trigger. "She was planning this," I whispered. Watching the footage for the 10th time, she was waiting. For the right moment, Jake was equally stunned when I showed him the evidence. "Sir, this isn't just attempted murder. This is conspiracy. We're looking at federal hate crime charges." But Patricia wasn't going down without a fight. Her legal team, funded by what appeared to be unlimited resources, launched a vicious counterattack. They filed motions claiming Emma was a community threat who had been menacing residents for months. They subpoenaed Emma's medical records, trying to paint her autism as a dangerous condition that made her unpredictable and violent. The worst part was watching how the community split. Half the neighbors rallied around us, horrified by what Patricia had done. But the other half, particularly longtime residents who had built their retirement dreams around property values, seemed to believe that Emma somehow deserved what happened. I started receiving anonymous letters telling me to take my damaged daughter and leave. Someone spray-painted "Freak Family" our garage. Our tires were slashed twice. But the breaking point came when I discovered Patricia had been systematically targeting other families with disabled children. Over the past 5 years, 7 families have been forced to move after facing escalating HOA harassment. Patricia had perfected a system of psychological torture designed to drive out anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. Emma, recovering slowly but bravely, looked at me one evening and said, "Mom, we can't let her do this to other kids, can we?" That's when I knew this case was about more than justice for Emma. It was about exposing a predator who had been hiding behind community standards and property values to unleash her hatred on the most vulnerable among us. The trial was set for October 15th. Patricia's team was confident, well-funded, and ruthless, but they had no idea what was coming for them. Walking into that courthouse on October 15th felt like entering a gladiator arena. Patricia sat at the defense table in a conservative navy suit, her gray hair perfectly styled, playing the role of respectable suburban matron to perfection. When she looked at me across the courtroom, her smile was cold and confident. She thought she had already won. Judge Margaret Hartwell, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense jurisprudence, called the court to order. "We're here today for the criminal trial of Patricia Kellerman, charged with attempted murder in the first degree, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and federal hate crime violations." District Attorney Michael Torres, a passionate prosecutor who had taken the case personally after meeting Emma, delivered an opening statement that made the gallery gasp. He showed the jury the doorbell camera footage, Emma's medical records, and those damning Facebook messages. "Ladies and gentlemen, this was not self-defense," Torres declared, his voice ringing through the courtroom. "This was a calculated execution attempt against a disabled child, carried out by a woman who had spent 2 years planning to rid her community of anyone she deemed unworthy." Patricia's defense attorney, Richard Blackstone, a slick corporate lawyer whose $1,000 suit couldn't disguise his soullessness, painted a very different picture in his opening. "My client is a pillar of this community who dedicated her life to maintaining property values and neighborhood safety," Blackstone argued. When faced with what appeared to be an aggressive intruder who had been repeatedly trespassing, she exercised her legal right to defend her property. The first few days of testimony, when, as expected, medical experts described Emma's injuries, neighbors testified about the shooting, and police officers presented their evidence, Emma herself took the stand on day 3, and I watched Patricia's mask slip for just a moment when my daughter bravely described what happened. "I just wanted to say sorry about the ball," Emma testified, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I always say sorry when I accidentally do something wrong. That's what Mom taught me." But Patricia's team had prepared for this. During cross-examination, Blackstone ruthlessly grilled Emma about her autism, trying to paint her as unpredictable and potentially threatening. I wanted to leap over the gallery rail and strangle him, but Jake held my arm. "Why did you approach Mrs. Kellerman's door without your mother's permission?" Blackstone pressed. "I did have permission," Emma answered honestly. "Mom waved at me when I asked." But you didn't wait for a verbal response, did you? You just assumed you had permission. The questioning went on like this for hours, twisting Emma's innocent honesty into something sinister. By the time Blackstone finished, he had managed to make Emma's autism sound like a dangerous condition that made her a threat to the community. Patricia's testimony on day 5 was a masterclass in manipulation. She took the stand wearing a simple black dress and pearl earrings, looking like everyone's favorite grandmother. I had been living in fear for months, Patricia testified, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. This child had been increasingly aggressive, ignoring property boundaries, disturbing the peace. That day, when she came banging on my door with such force, I genuinely feared for my life. It was all lies, but she delivered them with such conviction that I saw some jurors nodding sympathetically. That's when Jake played our ace card. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call a surprise witness, Rebecca Walsh, former HOA board member. Rebecca was Dennis Walsh's ex-wife, recently divorced and apparently ready to burn down everything her ex-husband had built. She walked to the witness stand with purpose, her auburn hair pulled back severely, her green eyes blazing with righteous anger. Mrs. Walsh, Torres began. Were you present at private HOA board meetings where the defendant discussed the Martinez family? I was present at many meetings, Rebecca replied, her voice clear and strong. Patricia didn't just discuss the Martinez family, she obsessed over them. She called Emma a genetic mistake and said that disabled children were evolutionary failures that shouldn't be tolerated in civilized communities. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hartwell had to bang her gavel repeatedly for order, but Rebecca wasn't finished. Patricia also told the board that she had been researching Stand Your Ground laws, looking for ways to legally harm Emma without facing consequences. She said, and I quote, "Sometimes you have to cull the herd to protect the healthy stock." Blackstone objected furiously, but the damage was done. Rebecca had more. 2 days before the shooting, Patricia showed me a .22 rifle she had purchased. She said she was prepared to defend community standards against genetic defectives. Those were her exact words. The jury was staring at Patricia in horror now. Her mask of suburban respectability had finally cracked, revealing the monster underneath. But as Rebecca continued her testimony, describing Patricia's elaborate plans to systematically drive out disabled families, something unexpected happened. Patricia began to smile, not a nervous smile or a fake one, a genuine expression of satisfaction that made my blood run cold. She looked directly at me and mouthed words that would haunt me forever. You lose. Patricia's smile during Rebecca's testimony should have been the moment I celebrated. Instead, it filled me with a dread I couldn't explain. Jake noticed my expression and leaned over. What's wrong? We've got her dead to rights now. But something about Patricia's confidence felt off. She wasn't acting like a woman facing life in prison. She was acting like someone who still held all the cards. The prosecution rested after Rebecca's devastating testimony, and Blackstone's closing argument was surprisingly brief. He barely challenged the evidence, instead focusing on technicalities and procedure. It was almost like he was going through the motions. Ladies and gentlemen, Blackstone concluded, while my client's words may have been unfortunate, words are not crimes. The only evidence of actual criminal intent you have is hearsay from a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge in a messy divorce. Torres's closing was passionate and thorough, walking the jury through every piece of evidence that proved Patricia's premeditation. When he finished, I felt confident we had won. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with their verdict on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree. We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Emma, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand with tears in her eyes. Patricia showed no emotion at all, just that same unsettling smile. On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant guilty. More cheers. I was crying now, thinking justice had finally been served. On the federal hate crime charges, We find the defendant guilty on all counts. Judge Hartwell banged her gavel for order, then addressed Patricia directly. Mrs. Kellerman, you have been found guilty of attempting to murder a disabled child in a premeditated hate crime. I hereby sentence you to 25 years to life in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. That's when Patricia finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent courtroom. Your Honor, I'd like to exercise my right to make a statement before sentencing. Judge Hartwell looked surprised, but nodded. Very well. Patricia stood, straightened her suit jacket, and turned to face the gallery with that same confident smile. 25 years to life, she repeated, as if savoring the words. I suppose that's a fair price for reading the world of genetic waste. The courtroom gasped. But Patricia wasn't finished. You see, Sarah Martinez, you think you've won. But what you don't understand is that I was never the real threat to your daughter. I was just the trigger. Literally, my blood turned to ice as Patricia's meaning became clear. The Meadowbrook Standards Committee doesn't end with me. There are others, in other communities, using the same methods I pioneered. Your victory here today just proved that our approach needs refinement, not abandonment. She looked directly at Emma, her eyes filled with pure hatred. Your damaged little girl will never be safe, no matter how many of us you put in prison. We are legion, and we are patient, and we will never stop protecting our communities from contamination. Judge Hartwell was banging her gavel frantically, but Patricia's final words cut through the chaos like a knife. Tell me, Sarah, do you really think I was working alone? As the bailiffs led Patricia away, still smiling that horrible smile, Rebecca Walsh caught my eye from across the courtroom. The triumph I had expected to see in her face was replaced by something else. Fear. She mouthed one word that made my world collapse. Run. That night, as Emma slept peacefully for the first time in months, I sat in my home office researching everything I could find about Patricia's network. What I discovered made me realize that our legal victory was just the beginning of a much larger nightmare. The Meadowbrook Standards Committee was connected to similar groups in 17 states, all targeting families with disabled children, all using HOA powers and property values as weapons, all funded by a shadowy organization called the Community Purity Foundation. Patricia wasn't the monster. She was just one tentacle of something much more massive and organized than I had ever imagined. But here's the thing about mothers protecting their children. We don't back down, even when the odds seem impossible. Emma's victory in court gave her confidence back, and watching her heal gave me the strength to take on whatever came next. 6 months later, I launched the Emma Foundation, dedicated to exposing and fighting organized discrimination against disabled children in residential communities. We've already helped 12 families fight similar harassment, and we're building a legal network that spans the country. Patricia was right about one thing. She wasn't working alone, but what she didn't understand is that neither are we. Every parent whose child has been targeted, every neighbor who refused to stay silent, every person who believes that communities should protect all children, we are legion to Emma. Still carries the bullet in her skull, a permanent reminder of the hatred that exists in our world. But she also carries something else, the unshakable knowledge that sometimes the good guys win, and that her mother will never stop fighting for her. The war is far from over, but we won this battle, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. If you've experienced HOA discrimination or know someone who has, visit the Emma Foundation website to learn about your rights and find legal resources. Together, we can build communities where every child belongs.